In April 2009, Susan Boyle, a 47-year-old woman from the small Scottish town of Blackburn, became an overnight sensation. The clip of her audition on Britain's Got Talent quickly went viral, amassing 100 million views in just 9 days. What made her performance so unforgettable wasn't just her powerful voice, but the unexpectedness of it. A woman who had spent 47 years living in relative obscurity, constantly underestimated and overlooked by the entertainment industry, stepped onto a global stage and left the world speechless. The world had spent years categorizing Susan as too old, too plain, and too unconventional to succeed. But when her voice soared, all those preconceived notions crumbled in an instant, and she became impossible to ignore. The fame that followed was overwhelming, but it also came with a price. A difficult childhood. Susan Magdalene Boyle was born on April 1st, 1961, in Blackburn, West Lothian, Scotland, as the youngest of 10 children. Her birth was difficult, and doctors later noted that she had suffered oxygen deprivation during delivery, leading to what was described as minor brain damage. This diagnosis would follow her throughout her life, though it wasn't fully understood by those around her. As a result, Susan faced significant challenges in her childhood. She struggled in school, learning and processing information differently from her peers. The other children labeled her as difficult or slow, and she was relentlessly bullied. The nickname Susie Simple stuck, a cruel reminder that she didn't fit into the world's expectations. Despite this, Susan found solace in music, her one refuge from the harshness of her environment. Music as an escape from a young age, Susan Boyle could sing. It wasn't a polished, trained voice, but it was pure and unguarded, genuine, in a way that no one had taught her to be. Music didn't ask her to conform. It simply accepted her. She sang in church, at home, and in the quiet of her bedroom in her council house. Though her voice was something special, it was largely ignored by the outside world, and Susan spent years being overlooked, dismissed as someone with no potential. However, there was one person who never doubted her, her mother, Bridget. A woman of deep Catholic faith and unwavering belief in Susan, Bridget encouraged her daughter to sing publicly, always sitting in the front row at local talent shows, pressing Susan gently but firmly to pursue her gift. Music to Susan was not just a hobby, it was the thing that kept her grounded and gave her a sense of purpose, a life of overlooked potential. As Susan entered her 20s and 30s, she tried several times to break out of her small-town life and make her dreams of becoming a professional singer a reality. She applied to a performing arts program and recorded a demo tape in 1999, hoping to find some way into the industry. She submitted it to a Scottish talent competition but was rejected. Time and time again, Susan faced quiet, systemic rejection. It wasn't that she wasn't talented, her voice was stunning, but the entertainment world had a very specific image of who was allowed to succeed. Susan was too old, too plain, and too unconventional. She didn't fit the industry's narrow categories for success. Each time she was passed over, she returned to Blackburn, to her council house, to the life that was always waiting for her. A life defined by responsibility. By the time Susan reached her 40s, life had changed. Her father passed away in 1997, and Susan became the primary caregiver for her mother, Bridget, who was in her 90s and increasingly dependent on Susan. While the world outside continued to race forward, Susan remained in Blackburn, caring for her mother. She had no partner, no children of her own, and no professional career beyond the occasional local performance. Though Susan had dreams, they felt increasingly out of reach. The reality of her life seemed to grow smaller with each passing year. When Bridget passed away in 2007, Susan, now 46, was alone for the first time in her life. She lived in the same house where she'd grown up, still with her beloved cat, Pebbles, and her unfulfilled dream of becoming a singer. The audition. A moment of magic. Susan Boyle walked onto the stage at the Glasgow auditions for Britain's Got Talent wearing a gold lace dress she had bought just for the occasion. She was 47 years old, a woman who had spent her life being overlooked, and now she was standing in front of a live audience, many of whom had already written her off before she even opened her mouth. When the cameras rolled, the audience's skepticism was palpable. Some laughed, some rolled their eyes, and the judges, Amanda Holden, Piers Morgan, and Simon Cowell, seemed to expect nothing extraordinary. But then Susan began to sing, "I Dreamed a Dream" from Les Miserables. The transformation in the room was immediate. The laughter stopped. The judges leaned forward in surprise. The audience, who had once mocked her, rose to their feet in astonishment. It wasn't just that Susan's voice was beautiful. It was that it forced everyone to confront the distance between their assumptions and the truth. The power of her performance bypassed all the defenses the audience had built up, and by the end, there were tears in the room. The world takes notice. Within hours of her audition, the clip was uploaded to YouTube. In just 9 days, it had been watched 100 million times. Susan Boyle, a woman who had been invisible for most of her life, was now impossible to ignore. But she didn't know what that meant. Back in Blackburn, she was still quietly going about her life, astonished by the sudden attention. The phone rang constantly with offers and requests for interviews pouring in from around the world. The attention was overwhelming, and Susan, who had spent so many years living in the shadows, wasn't ready for the scale of it. Fame, when it arrives suddenly, doesn't allow for the time to build the emotional armor necessary to withstand it. The price of fame. In the weeks following her viral audition, Susan Boyle's life changed dramatically. She appeared on morning shows in America, gave interviews to magazines, and suddenly found herself surrounded by a team of managers, publicists, and agents. The world was watching, and it wasn't just her voice they were interested in, it was her story. Susan had become a symbol of the power of persistence, of the beauty of an overlooked woman finding her moment. But fame comes at a cost. For Susan, that cost was the loss of her privacy, the overwhelming pressure to live up to the expectations placed upon her, and the constant scrutiny of the media. While her story was inspiring, the reality of living in the spotlight was far more complicated. She had 9 days to adjust to the fact that her life was no longer her own. A new chapter. Though Susan Boyle had spent 47 years living in relative obscurity, her rise to fame marked the beginning of a new chapter. She became an international sensation, and her voice was celebrated around the world. But fame, as Susan soon learned, was not always as glamorous as it seemed. The expectations, the pressure, and the constant public eye weighed heavily on her. Yet through it all, Susan remained true to herself. She had always been more than just a voice. She was a woman who had spent her life fighting for recognition, and she had finally found it. The journey wasn't easy, but it was hers. And in the end, Susan Boyle became more than a viral sensation. She became a symbol of resilience, showing the world that it is never too late to be seen for who you truly are.